The grand hall of the alien palace was not made of stone or metal like human castles. It was alive. Its walls pulsed faintly with light, like veins glowing under the skin of a giant beast. The ceiling stretched high above, disappearing into darkness while thousands of hovering crystals floated in the air, glowing with gentle light like captured stars. They gave the entire place a dreamlike beauty, but also a sense of power. Warriors stood on both sides of the hall. They were not like human soldiers. Each was tall and broad, with 4 strong arms holding long spears carved from bone-like ivory. Their armor shimmered like liquid silver, and their insect-like eyes never blinked. They watched everything with cold, sharp focus. Any outsider would feel small and weak under their gaze. At the far end of the hall was the throne. It was made of living stone that shifted slightly as if breathing, and upon it sat the alien queen. Her body was tall, elegant, and radiant. Her skin glowed faintly as though fire lived inside her veins. Her golden eyes were steady, unreadable like suns that judged without mercy. She was not just a ruler, she was a force of nature. Every being in the hall kept silent. No one dared to speak, no one dared to breathe too loudly. The queen's presence demanded it, and into this silence walked a human, Daniel. He was not dressed in shining armor, nor did he carry a decorated weapon. His clothes were simple, worn from travel, and a scar cut across his cheek like a reminder of battles long past. His shoulders were heavy, his back slightly bent, yet his eyes carried something unshakable. He was no prince, no noble, no hero out of songs. He was simply a soldier, one who had seen too much and survived when others did not. The court expected him to bow deeply, to throw himself to the ground before their queen. That was the custom of every visitor, especially a human outsider. But Daniel only stood still. He placed a hand over his chest in respect, but his eyes never lowered. It was not arrogance, it was quiet dignity, the kind of strength that came from pain and endurance. The silence stretched. The air itself seemed to wait, and then, before anyone could understand what was happening, a small figure ran forward. It was the queen's heir, the child. She was delicate compared to her mother, her skin a softer glow, her body small and fragile, her violet eyes wide with innocence. The court had always seen her as untouchable, a symbol of the empire's future. No one dared approach her without permission, but she ignored all tradition. She ran past the guards, past the nobles, past the courtiers who gasped in shock. She ran straight to Daniel, and then, before the entire hall, she threw her small arms around his leg. Her voice rang out pure and clear, echoing through the living walls. "Father." The sound struck like lightning. The alien nobles froze. The guards stiffened, their spears trembling in their forehands. Whispers began to hiss through the air like snakes. Never in their history had the heir called any outsider such a name. To call him father was not just a mistake. It was a declaration. It was intimacy. It was power. Daniel's eyes widened. His lips parted, but no words came out. He looked down at the child, confused, overwhelmed. He had never imagined such a moment. The little heir looked up at him, her violet eyes filled with trust and warmth. She repeated it softly, as though reminding him of a truth he had forgotten. "Father." Gasps echoed across the hall. Some nobles dropped their jeweled cups. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others stared at Daniel with hatred. And upon her throne, the alien queen leaned forward. Her golden eyes, steady and unreadable, now burned with something deeper. She studied the human in silence. The entire court waited for her reaction. Would she deny it? Would she punish the human? Would she strike down this insult? But the queen said nothing, and in that endless silence, Daniel felt the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing down on him, and a single small hand holding him steady. The word father still hung in the air like thunder after a storm. The alien nobles could not believe what they had just witnessed. The queen's heir, the most protected child in the empire, had broken all rules of tradition and called a human by that sacred name. Murmurs rose through the hall like the hiss of snakes. Some voices shook with fear, others with anger. "Impossible," one alien noble whispered. "A mistake," another hissed. "Blasphemy," cried a third, his mandibles clattering. The guards shifted uneasily. Their forearms tightened around their tall spears as if ready to strike. But none dared move without the queen's command. Daniel stood frozen, his scarred hand trembling at his side. He could feel the little heir holding on to him, her small fingers clutching his leg tightly as if she was afraid the court might tear him away from her. Her violet eyes gazed up at him, filled not with fear but with something far heavier, trust. Daniel's throat felt dry. His mind spun. Why would she call me that? Why in front of them all? He tried to speak, but his voice cracked under the weight of the moment. Why would you call me that? He whispered down to her, so low that only she could hear. The child tilted her head. Because you are, she said, as though it was the most obvious truth in the universe. The words pierced him deeper than any blade. He felt the memories stirring inside him. The battlefield, the smoke, the ruins, the frightened cry of a child he had once carried in his arms. But before he could fully remember, a booming sound filled the hall. The queen had risen. Her towering form glowed with an inner fire, and when she lifted her hand, the entire hall fell silent at once. The whispers died. The noble straightened in fear. Even the guard stopped breathing. Her golden eyes locked onto Daniel, sharp as suns burning through the clouds. Do you not remember, human? She asked, her voice rolling through the chamber like thunder across mountains. Daniel's breath caught. He lowered his eyes, struggling to meet her gaze. His heart pounded against his ribs. The words touched something inside him, something he had buried, something painful. He remembered war. He remembered fire. He remembered carrying bodies, dragging comrades, fighting for survival on alien soil. And he remembered, yes, on a day drenched in blood and smoke, he had heard a small cry. He had pushed aside wreckage, ignored the danger of collapsing walls, and found a little alien child. Alone, terrified, helpless. He had not thought. He had simply acted. He had lifted her into his arms, shielded her from falling fire, and carried her until his legs nearly gave out. He had whispered to calm her, even though she did not understand his language. It's all right. You're safe now. I'll protect you. I'm here, like a father. The memory slammed into him so hard he staggered. His lips trembled as he looked down at the air clinging to him now. Could it be her? The same child? The court watched in silence. Some alien nobles leaned closer, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. Others shook their heads in denial. The word father was not just a name, it was a bond. If the heir truly saw this human as father, then their traditions, their politics, their entire order could be shaken. One noble dared to speak, his voice trembling with rage. Your Majesty, this cannot stand. A human, a stranger? To be named father of your heir, it insults the throne. Another added sharply, if this outsider holds such a place in her heart, then he may hold influence over her future. That is dangerous. That is unacceptable. The queen raised her hand once more, and silence fell again like a heavy curtain. She did not yet give judgment. She simply watched. Her heir clung tighter to Daniel's hand, her small voice trembling now. Don't let them take you, she whispered, almost like a plea. Daniel swallowed hard. He looked around the hall at the hundreds of eyes fixed on him, some filled with suspicion, some with hatred, and a few with wonder. He could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down like chains. And yet at the same time, he felt the light weight of a child's trust pulling him upward. He did not know what this would mean for him. He did not know if the queen would spare him or condemn him. But one thing was clear. The bond between him and the heir was real. The hall waited for the queen's verdict. Daniel's heart beat like a drum in his chest. And in that stillness, he realized something terrifying and beautiful. The life he thought he had left behind had just returned to claim him. The queen's words echoed in the grand hall. Do you not remember? Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His body stiffened and his mind struggled to open doors he had locked long ago. He wanted to say no. He wanted to say he did not understand. But the moment her words reached him, memories that he had buried deep inside began to rise, heavy and unstoppable. The court was silent, waiting, their glowing eyes fixed on him. The little heir still held his hand, her small fingers squeezing tightly, as if urging him to remember. And then the images came. He was back on that battlefield. The sky had been black with smoke, filled with burning ships falling like meteors. The air was poison choking his lungs. Screams, alien and human alike, echoed through the ruined city. Daniel had been a soldier, not a hero, just another man trying to survive the chaos. His squad had been wiped out in an ambush. He had stumbled alone, carrying wounds that burned and bled, dragging his body through the rubble. And then he had heard it, A sound unlike the roar of war. A small cry, weak, fragile. He remembered running toward it, not knowing why. He remembered digging through broken stone with bleeding hands. And there, under the wreckage, he had seen her. A small alien child, no older than 4. Her body trembling, her violet eyes swollen with tears. He had almost turned away. He had told himself it wasn't his duty, that he had no strength left, that he couldn't save anyone anymore. But something inside him refused. He had lifted the stone with a grunt, ignoring the pain. He had crawled into the dust, pulling the child into his arms. She had clung to him instantly, her tiny hands gripping his torn uniform. She hadn't cared that he was human. She hadn't cared that he was the enemy. To her, he was someone who came when no one else did. Daniel had run through fire and falling buildings with her in his arms. He had shielded her with his body when explosions ripped through the streets. He had given her the last of his water, though his throat burned like sand. He remembered whispering to her, even though she could not understand his language. His voice had been raw, broken, but soft. "It's all right. You're safe now. I'll protect you. I'm here, like a father." The words had slipped out without thought. He had not meant to claim anything. He had only wanted to calm her, to give her hope in a world that was burning down, and yet, she had remembered. Daniel's eyes widened as the truth crashed down on him. The little heir clinging to him now in the palace was that same child. The one he had saved when all hope was gone. His lips trembled. His knees felt weak. He looked down at her, his voice breaking. "It was you." Her violet eyes lit up, shimmering with recognition. She nodded almost eagerly, as though she had been waiting years for him to finally realize. The court gasped. The alien nobles exchanged shocked looks. They had heard the story of the heir's rescue long ago, though the details had always been hidden, spoken only in whispers. None of them had expected this, that the rescuer was a human, that the bond was unbroken, that the child had never let go of that single moment of kindness. The queen stepped down from her throne, her golden eyes fixed on Daniel. She was a vision of fire and majesty, but when she spoke, her voice was softer than the hall had ever heard. "She never forgot," the queen said. "When our walls fell, when our people died, when even my armies could not reach her, you did. You carried her. You gave her water when our rivers were ash. You gave her courage when even we could not. To her you are father, not by blood, but by the bond of sacrifice." Her words struck the court like a hammer. Some nobles bowed their heads in respect. Others hissed in anger. The hall trembled with tension. Daniel stood frozen, his heart caught between guilt and wonder. He had not saved her for glory. He had not expected thanks. He had done it because no one else would. And now, years later, that small act had followed him back, binding him to the throne of an empire. The heir pressed her face against his side, whispering one word again as though it was all that mattered. "Father." Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt tears burn his scarred cheeks. And the court of the alien queen watched, stunned, as a human soldier's forgotten kindness rewrote their future. The court was still buzzing with whispers, their alien voices sharp and uneasy, but no one dared to speak too loudly. The queen now stood tall before her throne, her golden eyes never leaving Daniel. Her presence filled the hall like a storm about to break. Daniel stood still, the little heir still holding his hand, her small fingers refusing to let go. His heart was heavy with the memories that had returned. He had not asked for this moment, yet it had found him. The child's voice calling him father echoed in his chest, both strange and painfully real. The queen's gaze softened slightly. Her voice, though still strong, no longer rolled like thunder. Instead, it carried the quiet weight of truth. "She never forgot," she said, each word deliberate. "Do you understand, human? To her, you are more than a face from the past. You are the one who carried her through fire when even my warriors could not reach her. You gave her hope when all else was ash." Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. His throat felt dry, his chest tight. He looked down at the child again. She gazed back up at him with wide violet eyes, so full of innocence and certainty that it made his own doubts crumble. The queen stepped closer, and the crowd instinctively shifted back. Even her own nobles, decorated in shimmering robes and heavy jewels, moved aside like waves parting for a ship. She towered over Daniel, her glowing skin radiating power, yet there was no threat in her stance now. Many in this court believe strength is measured by bloodlines and armies, she continued. But she, the queen gestured to her daughter, knows another truth. She calls you father not because of power, not because of blood, but because you gave her something far greater. Sacrifice. The hall was silent except for the faint hum of the living walls. Some nobles lowered their heads, unable to meet the queen's eyes. Others clenched their jaws in silent anger, struggling to accept what they were hearing. Daniel shook his head slowly. I never thought she would remember, he said, his voice rough, almost breaking. I didn't save her for reward. I didn't even know who she was. I just couldn't leave her there. The queen's expression softened further, a flicker of something almost human in her golden gaze. That is why she remembers. That is why she trusts you. Not because you sought glory, but because you gave kindness when no one else would. Her words spread across the court like fire. They stung those who lived their lives for power and ambition. They humbled those who prided themselves on noble blood. And they lit something new in the eyes of the heir, who clung tighter to Daniel's hand, her face glowing with happiness. The queen turned, addressing the hall now, her voice carrying like a command carved in stone. You have all heard her, she said firmly. She names him father. To deny her truth would be to deny the bond that kept her alive. Do not forget, it was not our armies that saved her that day. It was a single human. Gasps and murmurs rippled again through the crowd. Some bowed their heads in reluctant respect. Others glared at Daniel as though he had stolen something precious. But none dared to speak against the queen's words openly. Daniel's heart ached as he listened. He was not sure if he deserved such honor. He had always been just a soldier, scarred and weary, not a man of noble titles or high thrones. Yet here he stood in the center of an alien court, being named family by the queen herself. The heir leaned against him, her small voice trembling with relief. I knew you would come back. Daniel looked down at her, his scarred hand gently resting on her shoulder. He felt a warmth inside that he had not felt in years. For so long he had lived with only grief and survival. But here, in this hall of fire and stone, he felt something different. Belonging. The queen's golden eyes rested on him once more. From this day forward, none in this court will question why she calls you father, she declared. You are part of her story and thus part of ours. The hall fell silent again, stunned. The air was heavy with disbelief, awe, and unease, and so it was that a scarred human soldier, one who had long thought himself forgotten, was bound to the future queen of an empire, not because of blood, not because of rank, but because in the darkest of times, he had shown the greatest strength of all, the strength to protect without asking for anything in return. The queen's declaration still echoed across the vast hall, but not every heart accepted it. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the faint hum of the glowing walls. Then from among the nobles a deep voice thundered. A warlord stepped forward. He was taller than the rest, his armor dark and jagged like broken stone. 4 massive arms stretched outward as he gripped his long spear, its blade dripping faint light. His insect-like eyes glared at Daniel with hatred, and his mandibles clattered like grinding steel. This cannot be, the warlord roared, his voice shaking the chamber. A human cannot be father to the heir of our empire. This is a lie. This is poison. If we allow this, we shame our blood, we shame our ancestors. The crowd stirred. Many nodded in agreement, whispering their approval of his words. Fear and anger ran like fire through the hall. Some even hissed openly, their sharp teeth flashing. Daniel felt the weight of 100 hostile eyes. He stood still, but his chest tightened. He was no stranger to being hated, yet this hatred was different. It was sharpened by politics, sharpened by fear of change. The queen did not move. She only watched, her golden eyes calm as though testing what would happen next. The warlord slammed the butt of his spear on the ground, the sound booming like thunder. If this human dares to claim the title of father, he bellowed, then let him prove his worth. Let him fight me here before the eyes of the court. If he fails, he dies. If he dies, the child forgets her foolish word. Gasps filled the hall. Nobles exchanged nervous glances. None had expected such a direct challenge, but none could deny the old custom. In their tradition, when words could not settle honor, strength must decide. The heir's violet eyes widened in fear. She gripped Daniel's hand with both of hers, shaking her head. No, she cried out, her voice breaking. Don't hurt him! Please don't take him away from me." Daniel knelt down, his scarred hand gently brushing the child's glowing cheek. His voice was low, steady, but filled with pain. "It's all right. I promised I would protect you, remember? That means I don't run from this." Her small hands trembled as she tried to hold on to him tighter. But he slowly stood, facing the towering warlord. "I never asked for titles," Daniel said firmly, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "I never asked for power, but if you think I will walk away from her, you're wrong. If you want me gone, you'll have to go through me." The hall grew still. Even the whispers died. The warlord snarled, lowering his spear, his forearms flexing like iron. His armor gleamed with sharp edges, made for killing. He looked like a storm about to crash down. Daniel, by contrast, stood with nothing but the strength of his scarred body and the will in his heart. His clothes were plain, his hands empty. But his eyes burned with a fire the warlord could not understand. The queen leaned back against her throne, her gaze sharp but calm. She did not interfere. She knew this was more than a fight. This was a test, not just of Daniel, but of the bond her daughter had chosen. The heir cried again, her voice echoing like a fragile bell. "Please don't hurt him!" But her words could not stop what was already set in motion. The warlord advanced, his heavy steps shaking the floor. Daniel did not retreat. He took a deep breath, clenched his fists, and prepared himself. He was no alien giant. He was no legend. He was just a man. But he was a man who had made a promise. And in that hall, with the entire court watching, Daniel faced the warlord not as a soldier fighting for glory, but as a father protecting his child. The moment hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Just before the storm would break, the hall became a battlefield of silence. Every noble, every guard, every servant held their breath as the warlord stepped forward with his spear, its blade glinting under the crystal lights. His forearms flexed with unnatural strength, muscles rippling beneath dark armor. He was born for war, trained since childhood to crush enemies without mercy. Across from him stood Daniel, scarred, tired, human. No armor, no weapon, just a man with calloused fists and weary eyes. But those eyes burned with something no one else in that hall carried, the unshakable promise of a father. The heir clutched her mother's throne, tears streaming down her glowing cheeks. "Please," she whispered, though her small voice carried across the vast hall. "Please don't take him from me," the warlord sneered. "Do you see, child? He is nothing. He has no claws, no fangs, no strength. He will fall like dry leaves in the storm." But Daniel did not move. His voice, steady and rough, cut through the silence. "I've seen storms. I've walked through fire. I don't care how strong you are. You won't touch her." The warlord roared and charged, his spear thrust forward like lightning. Daniel moved, not with the grace of a trained duelist, but with the sharp instincts of survival. He ducked, the spearhead slicing past his shoulder, and rolled aside. Pain shot through his body, but he forced himself up. The warlord swung again, his forearms striking in unison, each blow like a hammer. Daniel blocked one, dodged another, but a third slammed into his chest, throwing him backward. The crowd gasped. Blood filled his mouth. His ribs screamed in pain, yet Daniel staggered back to his feet. He wiped the blood away and raised his fists again. The warlord laughed, a cruel booming sound. "You are broken already. Just fall." Daniel's voice cracked but held firm. "I can't, not while she's watching." Another clash came. The spear sliced across his arm, leaving a deep cut. Daniel grunted, his body trembling. But he remembered every face of those he had once failed to protect. Every comrade lost. Every innocent life gone because no one stood their ground. He would not add this child's name to that list. The warlord raised his spear for the killing blow. The hall seemed to freeze. The heir screamed, "Father!" Her voice rang with desperate terror. That word struck Daniel harder than any weapon. Something inside him ignited, an iron will that no blade could break. With a roar, he stepped forward instead of back. He caught the shaft of the spear in both hands, ignoring the pain as it cut into his palms. The warlord snarled, pushing with all his monstrous strength. But Daniel held on. His muscles burned, his bones felt like they would snap, yet he refused to release. Inch by inch, he forced the spear down, twisting it aside. The court gasped. No human should have been able to resist such power. But Daniel's strength was not born from muscle. It was born from love, from promise, from the desperate refusal to fail. With one last heave, He snapped the spear against his knee. The weapon shattered, fragments clattering across the floor. The warlord staggered back in disbelief, staring at the broken shaft in his hands. Daniel swayed, his body bruised and bleeding, but he still stood tall. His voice was ragged, but it carried through the silence like a vow carved in stone. You can beat me, you can break me, but you will never take me from her. Not while I can still stand. The hall erupted in gasps and cries. Even the nobles who hated him could not deny what they had seen. A man who should have fallen in moments had endured, had resisted, had broken the weapon of one of their mightiest warlords. The warlord dropped to one knee, his head lowered in shame. He had not been defeated by strength, but by spirit, and in their culture, spirit mattered most. Daniel staggered, his knees almost giving way, but before he could fall, the Heir rushed forward and caught him with her tiny arms. She pressed her face into his chest, sobbing with relief. I knew you wouldn't leave me, she whispered, and though his body screamed with pain, Daniel smiled faintly, resting a hand on her glowing hair. Never, he said. The court stood stunned. A human, weak in body but unbreakable in heart, had turned their world upside down. The great hall had never been so silent. The nobles, warriors, and attendants who had once mocked the human now stared at him as though seeing something more than flesh and blood. They had watched their strongest warlord fall to his knees, his weapon broken not by brute force but by the will of a man who refused to let go. The queen herself rose slowly from her throne. Her eyes, usually sharp as blades, softened as they looked at Daniel. She had seen many champions, many warriors, many battles. But never had she seen a man stand with such courage for a child not born of his blood. The Heir clung to Daniel's chest, her small hands gripping his torn tunic. Her tears stained the fabric and her glow dimmed with relief instead of fear. She whispered over and over, "Father, Father," as if the word itself was a shield against the world. Daniel swayed, his wounds heavy on him, but he would not let go of her. Every drop of pain was worth this moment, this proof that she was safe. At last, one of the nobles broke the silence. His voice trembled not from fear but awe. He cannot be called only human. He is something more. Another noble, who had once laughed at Daniel, bowed her head. Perhaps we judged him wrong. Perhaps strength is not in claws and spears, but in the heart that refuses to break. The queen raised her hand, silencing the murmurs. She stepped down from her throne, each step echoing through the still hall. Her long robe swept behind her, the weight of authority heavy in every movement. She stopped before Daniel and the Heir. "Rise," she commanded softly. Daniel looked up, weary but defiant. "I am already standing," he said. For the first time, the queen smiled. Not a smile of victory or power, but of recognition. "Yes, you are." She turned to the court, her voice ringing with power. "You all have witnessed it." This human stood when no one else would. He faced death with empty hands and still refused to fall. He did this not for glory, not for power, but for love of my child. The hall trembled with the weight of her words. "From this day," the queen declared, "he shall not be called outsider. He shall not be called lesser. He is the protector of the Heir, the shield of this court, and—" She looked back at Daniel, her gaze softening again. "He is father to the one who has already chosen him as such." Gasps filled the chamber. To call a human father of the Heir was unheard of, unthinkable. But none dared argue. They had seen with their own eyes what words could never explain. Daniel bowed his head not in submission but in gratitude. "I never asked for titles," he said quietly. "I only promised her I'd stay." The Heir looked up at him, her eyes glowing brighter now, filled with pride. "And you did," she whispered. The queen reached out, placing her hand on her daughter's shoulder. For a moment, mother and child shared a silent understanding, and then the queen spoke again, her voice softer than before. "Sometimes blood does not make a father. Sometimes it is the heart." The court lowered their heads, humbled. The warlord himself, shamed yet not bitter, pressed his forehead to the floor. "I was wrong. The human has strength I cannot measure. Forgive me, Majesty." The queen simply nodded, but her eyes never left Daniel. As the hall slowly emptied, whispers spread like wildfire beyond its walls. The story of the human who stood unbroken, the man who became father to the heir of an alien throne, would travel through every corridor, every city, every world under the queen's rule. But Daniel did not care for legends. He cared only for the small hand that would not let go of his. He cared for the child who, despite all the galaxy's differences, had chosen him.